I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 14th meeting of the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission. If you're here to speak to one of the topics on our agenda this evening, I'll open a public meeting, and then I will make it obvious to you when it's time to come forward to the podium to make your point. You'll be given 3 minutes. Please stay on the topic at hand. Address your comments to the commission, not to the audience and not to staff. Thank you very much for being here. And then also, if you come up for comments during the public meeting, we'll ask you to state your name and address for the record. I'll now call the meeting to order at 2 minutes after 6. Commissioner Oceanbine, I think you're going to give us an invocation and lead the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Absolutely. Please bow our heads. Dear Lord, we come to you today with open hearts as servant leaders in our community. We hope that you guide our decisions in your footsteps so that those that come after us feel your love and guidance with our decisions here. We appreciate the staff and the citizens that are here as well, and we hope that they feel the caring heart through us that you provide us. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me in pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner Oceanbine. I think we have an agenda that's before us this evening. Does anyone have any comments or any changes or additions to the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Seconded.
All right, I have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we've had sent to us and in our packets in front of us the minutes from February 14th. Does everyone see those? Does anyone have any corrections, changes, or additions?
I move to approve February 14th minutes.
Second.
All right,
I have one couple of comments.
couple of comments.
A couple of places I think we misspelled Todd Wood's name. That's minor stuff.
And
We've got him T-O-O-D and W-O-O-O-D.
under secretary, you put vice chair.
I'm sure he's
with my
offended.
name instead of secretary.
I will fix that.
I will change my motion to take in consideration Commissioner Cooper and Commissioner Rohde's suggestions and changes for spelling and grammatical errors.
Second.
All right, thank you very much. All in favor of accepting the motions as they've been adjusted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we have one item on the consent agenda. That's a bond release for the Autumn Ridge Subdivision. Does anyone have any comments or any questions for staff or want to pull that off the consent agenda for review or discussion? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion to accept the consent agenda and seconded. Any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, our first item of old business is the issue of open space. And Ms. Voren, I think you've got staff presentation for that. Thank you.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. In front of you, I have consideration to add Article 14, our proposed open space ordinance. So I want to start by going through our whole timeline. We first had the vision for this open space ordinance back in January of 2022. And kind of following along our diagram right here, we constructed our purpose and intent statement in April of 2022. We moved on and presented our draft text in July of 22. And then we took it through the public process starting October of 2022. So we met with internal organizations, external organizations, members of our development community. We had a couple workshops, and we wanted to make sure that as many people in this community that would be affected by this ordinance got their eyes on it and got the opportunity to add comments, make changes and that sort of thing. So we really wanted a collaborative document. And that brings us to where we are now, which is consideration of adoption of this ordinance. So kind of starting back over with our very, very, very first steps and envisioning this whole process, we realized that there were some concerns over developments with smaller lots and no green space incorporated. We also wanted, as a city, to conserve our environment. So we wanted some environmental protections, and we wanted to be able to provide gathering spaces to build community within Johnson City. We also took a step back and noticed that the existing provisions of open space that we had in our RP districts were lacking any sort of guidance on quality. So we noticed that the open space standards were getting used to have land that was really unusable in the back of homes, inaccessible, and just not really what we wanted to see out of open space standards. And then we also took a look at our bridge and strategic plans and noticed that an open space ordinance would meet some of those goals and objectives. So that's kind of how we got to the point of, hey, let's look at creating an open space ordinance. So just talking about the value of open space a second, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but open space provides really a ton of different benefits in various ways throughout the community. So you've got economic benefits, you have environmental benefits, you have social benefits, and then even health and well-being, so very personal benefits to community members. So once we, went through all that and we had some meetings and some initial conversations, we drafted our purpose and intent statement, which is in front of you. And I'm not going to read it verbatim because you all had it in your packets and you all can read it now on the screen. But essentially the whole idea of this ordinance is to conserve spaces in Johnson City for both ecological and recreational value and have appropriate, usable, quality open space in our developments, not just the left away, throwaway land in the back of buildings. So when we started talking about the open space ordinance, it kind of had three different aspects. It had a commercial aspect, a multifamily aspect, and a single family aspect. And when we initially started talking about it, all three of these were housed under one open space ordinance. Since then, we have decided that commercial and multifamily still have some further study. And so we have pulled those two out. And so the ordinance that you all are considering tonight is single family only. So the standards that I'm about to present to you would be applicable to single-family developments, not commercial and not multifamily. So breaking that down a little bit further as far as the timeline goes, you can see that this actually first came to consideration at the Planning Commission workshop or Planning Commission meeting on December 13th. And then after that, we decided to send it back to workshop and break out, again, those two different areas. And so we have the single family following this sort of timeline right here. So we had a couple more workshops to kind of finalize some of the details of that ordinance. And then we are taking it to Planning Commission again on March 14th for consideration. Should you all vote to recommend this move forward to City Commission, it'll follow your typical 3 readings. So April 6th, April 20th, noting that April 20th will be the public hearing at City Commission, and then May 4th would be its finalization and adoption if it so chooses by the City Commission. Breaking that out, multifamily and commercial, ideally staff would like to bring that to workshop in April, bring it back to the Planning Commission in May, and then in June and proceeding into July, it would have its 3 readings under City Commission. Staff does still recognize that multifamily and commercial standards are potentially really important, but we believe that it was a really large conversation, and we've done a lot of talk over the single-family developments, and so we wanted to go ahead and proceed forward with that. No need to wait on that one's approval for the further development of multifamily and commercial. So breaking into the actual text, the applicability for the Johnson City Ordinance would be all single-family developments that are greater than 25 dwelling units or larger than 10 acres and where new roads are required. This is how it compares to some similar areas. So the idea with the applicability is that we wanted to make sure that this did not include infill projects, so your smaller subdivisions of 5-6 lots in the city. We didn't want to have to apply these standards to those infill projects. Moving on to required percentage. In front of you all is a suggestion for a 15% requirement. We got this number because it already existed in our RP districts, only those districts. So the RPs do, as exists, require a 15% open space. As you'll remember a second ago in the presentation, I noted that there were no standards on how that open space looked, and so you got a lot of the unusable land. But it is a percentage that was already existing in our zoning code, and it's also similar to other jurisdictions. So what that 15% looks like, as you'll see here is an example of a subdivision. You've got 36 single-family lots. It's roughly 11 acres. Adding the open space ordinance, if you were to take out 15%, you actually lose 5 of those lots. Engineer drew this up, Todd Wood actually, and so he gave this to the city to use to kind of show the process he would take when designing a site on how to incorporate that open space. So just so you have like a visual on what exactly 15% looks like. Moving on, the 15% is actually a little bit more diverse than that. So it breaks out into 2 different types of open space. So under this new ordinance, we have passive open space and we have active open space. And passive open space is essentially any unimproved area that's ecologically valuable. So it can be a field, it can be a nice wooded area, it can be land with easement, so it can be land under a power easement. It can also include stormwater and detention areas. On the flip side, active open space is essentially any improved area. So it can be improved with pools, a playground, a dog park, something to that nature. It can be on easements, and you can use the area surrounding your stormwater device. So if you wanted to put a walking trail around a stormwater pond, the walking trail would count as active. The stormwater itself would still count as passive, but because you activated that area around it, that would count as active. And of that 15%, half of it is going to have to be active. So that's going to be at least 7.5%. You can do more. You can activate the whole thing if you want, but you do have to activate at least 7.5% to provide residents of the development recreational opportunities and gathering spaces. So to kind of talk a little bit more about what passive open space looks like, you can see here we've just got some examples. This would be an example of stormwater, so you can see when it's not, raining and filled with water, it does kind of make a nice play area. Fields, you can go out and have a picnic. Just because something is passive doesn't mean residents can't use it. They can still absolutely go out and use it. You can see a cute little dog is using this as a nice little play area. And another pretty cute dog over here is down by the river playing. Those are staff's dogs, by the way, so I had to throw them in there. But this is what passive open space looks like. And then kind of on the flip side of that, you have active open space. So you can see, you're still out and enjoying. You have your dog park. I think that Johnson City has 2 incredible examples of active open space as far as stormwater projects that have been made into, really community gathering places and just staples of Johnson City itself. So you've got, Founders Park and King Commons. So that's kind of an idea of what active open space would be like. And again, that is the one that would be required at least 7.5%, so half of that 15%. Now, if you were to do a walking trail, we have added standards as to what those walking trails can be, because we didn't want developers to come in and the walking trails not have a nice longevity. We wanted to make sure that this is quality and it serves the residents in the future. If a greenway plan comes along, we do not currently have one. However, there is a committee, and Parks and Rec is, starting to undertake a potential greenway plan. And so if and when that comes along, we have added this language in our current ordinance that just says that it will comply with all future plans. And as that plan gets developed, a member of the planning staff will be on that committee and make sure that the 2 plans work together. And that may even involve this plan coming back for an amendment to add language. But it has been noted that if a greenway plan comes along, we do want these 2 plans to be cohesive. We just didn't want to hold up an open space ordinance to wait on a potential greenway plan to come through. As far as reductions and exceptions goes, you can have reductions or exceptions if the city wants to construct a park. So that would be up to the city to come in and work with the developer to construct a park and count that as the open space. If you are within a quarter mile from an existing park, you get up to a 25% reduction in your open space requirements. The idea there is just proximity to existing parks. You already have those amenities for residents. If there are 30,000 square foot lots or larger, or if you have agricultural uses. As far as access goes, we did include that you will need 10 feet of access along a public street. That 10-foot access can be along a private street at the discretion of the Development Services Director. A couple changes to other parts of the code. We have gone in and added some edits to the definitions. And so you'll see here that we've changed open space and added active or passive. to include the use of, for residents of their development. We've also said not limited to the use of residents of the development in case a developer wants to make their amenity public. It doesn't have to just be reserved for the residents and their guests. We've added open space active, open space passive, and then we've also changed some language in the RP districts, basically to exclude single-family development from that original RP standards. So if you come in as a single-family RP development, you will have to fall under this open space ordinance, not just the blanket 15% that doesn't have any standards. But we are leaving that open space requirement in the RP at the moment. So if a multifamily development comes in as RP, they would still have to follow the 15%. They just wouldn't have to have any of the standards associated with this ordinance. I did want to include a discussion about what happened at the workshop, because I believe that there was a lot of conversation going on about some pretty important things as far as the open space ordinance goes. And I think that a lot of that centered around affordability. And so kind of the conversation that took place, or my rendition of it, is that the more development regulations that we add, so open space standards, the adoption of the fire code, changes to the subdivision regulations, and all these other things, all of these kind of weigh down this scale, and you kind of lose a sense of affordability. That's not saying that they're a bad thing, but it is just noting that with every regulation comes a cost, whether that's to the developer or whether the developer passes that along to the homeowner. And so as we engage as a city in a conversation of both quality design and quality places, we do also have to take into account affordability. And so ultimately what happened after the discussion is that we removed the minimum contiguous open space standards that had originally been proposed. And this is just to allow design and flexibility and creativity when you're making these spaces. No two sites are the same, and what makes sense for one site might not make sense for another. I feel like we also got to a point with the 15% where we feel as though we are balancing both preservation goals and affordable housing goals. So staff was recommending 15% and moving forward with 15% because we do want to promote a balance of, again, quality development and a sense of place and all of the benefits that come with open space, while also keeping in mind affordability and the factors of, what's going to get pushed on to the homeowner and how this is going to impact development in our area. Ultimately, staff does recommend approval. There's a variety of policies in the bridge plan to support that, and I am happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. Okay, the floor is open for discussion from the commission to staff. Questions?
This is a question out of ignorance, but how do we measure, how will we measure active space? You take a picnic table and set it in the middle of a field.
Yeah, so activating the open space is going to be a little bit more difficult to get out of, for instance, because if they do put a picnic table, that does define the activated space, and so that piece of open space will count as activated.
How big of a piece? 5-acre field, and there's and I'm not being facetious, I'm just trying to understand how we ultimately will measure active versus passive.
As the ordinance reads, we do not have a maximum size limit on active open space, so if they had a field and put some picnic tables in it, that would all count as active.
The whole field.
Ms. Moore, we talked at one point, and I think we were talking about the criteria for the open space, 25 units, greater than 10 acres, and building new roads. And this was with the former director, but we talked about, should we make that an or an and? Or new roads or and new roads?
I believe it reads or new roads.
Oh, that was my recommendation, and you presented it as and.
It's also or 10 acres or 25.
It's,
Is that correct?
yes, it specifically reads, open space standards shall apply to any new single-family residential development that exceeds 25 dwelling units or is greater than 10 acres or where new streets, public or private, are required for the subdivision.
Thank you very much.
Jamie?
Could you go back to your affordability balancing there? So, the one before that one, yeah. When we talk about affordability and then you couple that with you had a slide on there about if you're within so many, what is a quarter mile of a park, then you could qualify for a 25% reduction, is that correct? As we have raw land, are there any calculations that we as a planning department or city management has in number of households before we create a park?
I'm not sure if Parks and Rec has metrics on that.
Would that be Parks and Rec, or would that be us as a land use?
Parks and Rec would be in charge of park planning.
But wouldn't we have to, wouldn't we, as a planning commission, would we not have to create a land use for them to put a park? I guess it's a chicken or egg thing for me, and I'm trying to understand which is, where does that directive come from? For, is it number of households? Is it, how do we determine where that starts, that process?
I mean, there could be a zoning initiative where we, create a park zoning district where, we hope to encourage parks to come to certain areas. But ultimately, Parks and Rec is tasked with looking at the city, analyzing what land is suitable, and planning the future of those parks, which I believe they're currently doing under their master planning right now.
Okay, thank you.
And parks are a function of land use, and city uses, municipal uses are allowed in all zoning districts, so she was correct. I mean, great question, and you're correct in your explanation, but, it's.
Well,
there-
close to the microphone.
you know, it is a land use, so it is a land use issue, but municipal uses are allowed in all zoning districts. And as far as the specific planning of parks, that falls under the Parks and Recreation Department.
So we would never see that. The park decided to put
If-
something down in a,
If Parks and Rec, if the decision between city management and Parks and Recreation were to develop a new park, then it would come to staff to review a site plan for building the park. It wouldn't necessarily come to the planning commission and like with a
Right.
rezoning of the property to be required.
I understand. Thank you for that input. I guess to couple that, to help with affordability and to create open space, I feel it should be a directive of our city to place parks in these areas that I would consider a park desert to help with the development, to help them reach that 25%, to help bring the housing costs down.
And I think that that's something that planning staff can work with Parks and Rec on, especially, with them currently undertaking their master plan and the growth management plan coming up.
Well, to couple that, I think the staff's done a wonderful job in presenting and researching, and I want to thank you for that.
If I can make a point too, if you have a park, then the properties around that park increase in value has been the pattern. So I think that offsets affordability losses, and I think that's a good thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
Other questions for staff?
I guess just one other, just to kind of, as we create these if we are to create a park, and we know it's in the planning phase of the park, could developers then say that that park will be built in the next 3 to 5 years, or is that where it is today? If it's not built, you can't qualify for it?
I think if a park is under development, then that would be able to count towards the reduction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boren. I'll open the floor for public comment now. Is anyone here to speak for or against the topic?
again,
Anyone here to speak to the question? Seeing no one raise their hand, I'll close the floor. So I do want to register with staff that we have documents, an email thread that started amongst the Planning Commission, fully in the view of the Planning Commission Department staff, that commenced on March, let's see,
7.
so
I think that's the last one. February 28th was the beginning of that email chain that ended on March 7th. And then there was also an email from Mr. Danny Sells that should go into the record. Would you make sure that happens, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, discussion within the commission.
You know, I'll just take a moment and just say, I think this has been one of the most vigorous discussions we've had about a topic amongst the planning commission. for the past, as Ms. Warren pointed out, for the past year. And I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. Staff has taught us a lot. And I've really enjoyed speaking to the community members and other commissioners and hearing different points and perspectives of it. I think the affordability issue is really important, especially as houses keep going up, prices keep going up, interest rates keep going up. And that's not lost on us, and I think staff did a great job of illustrating how we've tried to get rid of the contingency clause to make it more affordable. And I also agree that park space is also really important. I'm really hoping we get pushing on the Greenway plan to get that moved. But the subcommittee has worked really hard for the past year on this, with the developers who were there, involved in it, city staff. So I just appreciate everyone's work on this so far. I'll go ahead and take the opportunity to go ahead and make a motion to approve the open space article as presented by staff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the amendment proposal as developed by staff, as presented, and we have a second. Discussion of the motion.
Just a comment, and I'm for the motion, but I do think we need to encourage the city to get back in the business of building. Well, that's not fair, to be proactive as far as providing parks in these areas as proactively as they can. I know that's a lot of times chicken and the egg, but I think this will help the development community significantly.
Again, I'd like to kind of piggyback on your comment, and I'm not speaking of mega parks. I'm thinking of more 20,000, 40,000 square foot parks that are manageable, low maintenance. You know, instead of using mulch, you use artificial stuff and turf in some cases to cut down on maintenance costs. I think it's been proven over a 10-year period that artificial surfaces are more cost effective. But smaller parks, connectivity, especially in the areas that we're seeing growth, I think it could really add to not only that area, but our city.
I'd like to say, in connection with what Jamie and Bob have said, who will be the guiding light or the point to see that Parks and Recs does continue their job and that it doesn't become the developer's job? Who's going to mesh those two?
Well, we have a growth plan that, you know, I mean, everyone knows that we'll be developing a growth plan in the coming year. Parks and Rec has excellent staff. They have an interim director that's doing a fantastic job. They have quality staff. They have a good board, Parks and Recreation board, and they're actively working on a Parks and Recreation master plan that takes a lot of the questions that you and Commissioner Pavlich have had tonight. So I think we're in good hands that they're on the right track for making sure that we're looking at parks and all Parks and Recreation type things across the city. So they are on point right now with doing that, and there'll be further collaboration. We are increasing collaboration with Parks and Recreation and developing it. In fact, Ms. Voren and myself will be attending a conference on a Greenway Plan initiative in a couple weeks. So I think we're in good hands, and a lot of that will be driven by their master plan that they're working on right now.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'll second what Will said. I've been in contact, as well as Commissioner Dagenhart, with the Park and Rec Services and their board, and they're doing a top-notch job.
Thank you.
I have a lot of confidence in them.
Further questions or discussion? Nicole, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Bailey?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Rhodey?
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Oshenbein?
Yes.
Chairman Dagenhart?
Yes.
Motion has carried.
Thank you very much. And I want to compliment staff
Thank
for
you.
the
Yeah.
year's
Yep.
worth of
Yes.
work.
Fantastic job, folks.
Yes.
You
Congratulations.
did a
staff.
wonderful job presenting the
It's
story.
been a lot of fun.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. No, honestly, really have enjoyed it.
And to add to your job, we need more workshops like we've had, as Ben says.
All right, the next item is a proposed change to the zoning code regarding the topic of lot area averaging. Ms. Amber Rogers, I think you're up to give us that presentation.
I am. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Lot area averaging. So some of the reasons we would consider implementing lot area averaging in our zoning code include flexibility, reducing the amount of grading or vegetation that may need to be removed for a development. And also, there is the gem of a possibility of variety in lot sizes, which could result in a variety of housing sizes within a development. And with house cost changes, you might anticipate also cost changes. So I took R2B as an example and sort of built it out in a cartoon drawing, and this is what I did. So for R2B, the maximum coverage of the lot is 35%. The front yard setback is 20, rear yard 30, and side yard 8. And so what I did was I made boxes, and then those are the setbacks boxes that I put on top of the lot boxes that you'll see in the next slide. So like I said, it's a cartoon. It doesn't look like this in real life. But with the R2B, you would end up with a lot variation size between 7,200 and 10,800 square feet. And in all of these cases, the setbacks would allow more development than the restriction of 35% principal building size. So that's the 35% box is what you see in blue. That's basically the biggest principal building you could get on the lots of those sizes. So this is sort of a real life example. This is in another city. Actually, it's in a county, sorry. It's adjacent to a city. But house number 1 is a medium-sized house on a medium-sized lot for this development. House number 2 is a large house on a larger lot, and house number 3 is a smaller house on a small lot. And then we can see sort of what they look like. So number 1 is a medium house on a 4,600 square foot lot. Number 2 is a larger house on a larger lot, and then number 3 is the smallest. And this is just evidence that the developer chose to put houses that were in scale to the lots. So that's the variation that you could see. And in our single-family residential districts, those are the average area is the current minimum lot size. But when you implement lot area averaging, that would become the mean lot size for the entire development. And in this example that we were looking at, you can see it's a bigger spread, and the smallest lot is smaller than our smallest lot could be in our single-family districts. And then again, with the other development standards, coverage in the example development, the coverage is up to about 50%, which is higher than any of our districts allow. And then the minimum width is a lot smaller than what any of our districts allow. So what this is to say that this image is more intense than what we would see with lot area averaging. This is just sort of an idea. There's other jurisdictions. Memphis and Knoxville have something that's like you provide open space and you can get smaller lot sizes out of your subdivision. It's not really the same thing as lot area averaging because this is independent of any open space. But in other states, I found some jurisdictions that had actual lot area averaging, and that's 80% in Sultan. You can do 10% reduction. None of them have maximums, but they all have minimums in all of those, and they're pretty similar to what we're proposing. So the new definition is a lot of words, but the point is that the idea is to reduce grading, earthwork, vegetation removal. It's to help develop lands that are constrained with features like floodplains and sinkholes, where it's already more difficult to put lots in, and also to help sort of fit things more naturally into the landscape. And then the location it would go as far as the allowance would be in Article 4. There's already a section called reduction in lot size that we would just do a couple edits to, and then also add 4.5.2, which says the minimum lot would be no less than 80% of the district's minimum. The maximum would be, that would count towards, so you could have bigger lots than the 120%. We're not going to stop you from making 150% lots. But if we let them just have one mega lot to offset all of the tiny lots, the idea is sort of wasted. So that's why we decided that we would propose doing maximums. Oh, and I want to point out that nothing else can be reduced. You can't reduce your yards, this isn't like an allowance for variances for other development regulations. There's no setback reductions, there's no lot width reductions, it's only the lot size. We have a number of plans in our bridge plan and strategic plan that support this sort of an ordinance change. And staff recommends approval.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Questions for staff?
Ms. Rogers, you said some municipalities had minimum lot sizes, but none of them that you looked at had maximums.
I
You know
didn't
why?
see it. I don't know why. I didn't see it.
Okay.
So when, I guess I misunderstood, I thought the beauty of this was to reduce the number of variances coming to the BZA for unbuildable lots, so to speak. But in that case, no, because we're not gonna have any reductions of the setbacks or,
Yeah, it's not so that we can entertain other variances.
oh, okay, well, I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
It's to allow more flexibility in developing topographically or otherwise oddly shaped lots.
So that's where I get confused. If we're helping build on those lots,
Mm-hmm.
typically it's because of a setback or topographical.
So these are residential subdivisions that we're talking about. So this would be
I understand.
okay, so like a pretty big lot, and you're sort of constrained in areas of it. So instead of trying to force a developer into cookie cuttering, getting that minimum lot size everywhere across the board on a grid as they can to maximize the development, they can maximize it in a more flexible way. By putting maybe in the flatter areas or the areas closer to the road, slightly smaller lots, and then maybe in the more difficult areas, bigger lots, so that you can still get a development pad on the lot with the weird.
I follow you.
Okay.
Thank you for the explanation.
So there'd be the same total number of lots.
This would not give somebody the ability to put more lots on a piece of property than they would otherwise.
Nor would it cause them to have less lots.
So on a site that's already constrained, there's a possibility of that site already not being as able to be filled with as many lots. So it could be that they might get less lots, but it would be the option that they have the right to choose, right?
What
So
is
they
the
would.
choice? I guess I'm not
This
following
is
the
not a
choice.
requirement.
Oh,
It's
not using, it's either or.
Right. They can,
I'm sorry,
they
I'm
can
not
do
here
a
today.
regular subdivision, or they can choose to use this. And to the extent that a developer chooses to use this is also up to them.
Okay. Thank you, I apologize.
And I think that's one of the reasons I've loved this, and I think the commission's gotten so excited about this, is it really does, they don't have to move as much earth. They can, these neighborhoods are not gonna be laid out in these kind of grid patterns anymore. You're gonna have much more flowing streets and look much more, I think, pedestrian friendly.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Amber, for presenting. That was a very good job.
I just want to follow up on one point made by Commissioner Powell, which is a good one, just in a question about variance requests and the Board of Zoning Appeals. A lot of times, appeals to the BZA are an indication of what might not be working in the code. And our Board of Zoning Appeals over the last 3 years or so has met about 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay.
And those have usually been special exception requests. So we don't receive a lot of variance requests, and when we do, we work diligently with them to develop per the rules, because the legal statutes for a hardship are pretty tough. So a lot of variances won't be recommended as a, or come with a recommendation of approval from staff.
Understand.
So I don't think that setbacks and those sorts of things, we've just not had that sort of issue with those. So I think we're,
Once Amber clarified it, it was perfect. I just wasn't following the initials, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor for public comment. Is anyone here to speak to the question at hand? Please come forward and state your name and address at the podium, and you'll have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm George Smith. I live at 2212 Suncrest Village Lane, and I work for Landstar, which is a developer of subdivisions. When the lot averaging things will help, I'm not sure if it helps if you don't have also a minimum front width reduction in the smaller lots, because when you're going around the outside of a curve, you have bigger lots, and on the inside, you would have to have smaller lots, and without I don't know how it would work without also a variance, 80% down and 120 up on your minimum widths. On a different issue, choosing one subdivision over another, rectilinear layouts are always going to give you the most lots. Anytime you go away from that, you're going to get fewer lots by default.
Could you say that one more time?
Rectilinear layouts, your town pattern, will always, as a designer, give you the greatest number of lots at whatever size you choose. When you start making curves, you will lose lots. You can't help it, even with lot averaging. So just a point to make, that when we're going to a more ergonomically designed, for a better, lack of a better term, you are going to cost that developer lots. But if that's what the community chooses, then, that's what you do. So it's good. But I would want people to consider the front width of the lot in the 80 to 120 to make that more flexible. Because you're still going to get, if you have a narrow lot on the outside of a curve, you're still going to get a much bigger lot.
Are you talking about like a triangle lot?
Yeah, on the outside of a curve, you're fanning out, so you're going to get a bigger square footage area lot, but you may have, in order to keep the same number of lots, you may have to have a smaller minimum width at the setback. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Danny Karst, 1504 Dobbins Drive, Kingsport. I do think that this, because when we've been asked to go back and attempt to do this, because what it also does is when you attempt to create more curvature, you also are, as they've suggested, the streetscape automatically starts to change to the eye, and that's what we're trying to look for. We're looking for ways to get there. But I do think that, as George stated, that if there could be some help on where you start on it as you fan out into bigger lots, I think if we could have a consideration there, I think that would, not just for us, for those who follow us or whatever, it would be to give a little bit of thought to that tonight before, if you're going to pass this, so that someone's not coming back and they didn't really catch that. But we went back ourselves, and as we designed, we tried to put more curvature to it. And I think that actually, I never really thought about it, because you try to get lined up with your property, because whatever the word he used there was, we all know the impacts of that, but it actually looks better. I would want to try to, a developer would want, if it didn't cause to lose a lot, a developer would look to do that, because if the net was the same, you want it to look better and prettier. I mean, we all want whatever we can do. You can't help but be that way. I mean, Uwe knows that. I mean, you want it to look good to the eye when the people are out there, to the best of your ability. That we do look for that, because if the net's the same, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't? About everybody would. Even people that doesn't have the best intent, they're still. So, well, that looks better. The net's the same. So I ask you all to take a look at that before this becomes ironclad. Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Thank you.
Danny Sales, 325 Delmer Salts Road in Gray. And I just want to say, and of course, the issues that the developer brings up are ones that technical, and I don't intend to address those. Those are something that I think are legitimate to work out. The thing from my standpoint, where developments such as this are beginning to move out in my community in Gray, it gives the opportunity, as Mr. Carr said, for the curvature of the roads to be more appealing to the eye, a little better look. It also gives a very ability to vary the type of houses within a development. And it gives it a little different look than what this row house type looks, where you just lay everything out. So anything that provides an opportunity to make those blend into a rural community better is a good thing to do. And if it takes, some effort to figure out what you do on a curve and things like that, it makes sense to do that because it just looks better and is more readily acceptable within the community itself, I think. So I would be supportive of it and supportive of the kind of adjustments or the kind of exceptions that might allow those things to happen in a more reasonable fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak? Thank the public for their comments. That's very helpful. I'll close the public comments. So now I think the question comes before us.
Kind of a question back to staff. We do allow a variation in the frontage in a cul-de-sac, is that correct?
Yeah, cul-de-sac minimum lot width, I believe, is 40 feet.
Versus 50.
What about frontage?
Yeah, that's for a cul-de-sac.
But what y'all are talking about is less of a curve than a cul-de-sac.
It is.
If you got a sweeping curve just in a street.
It does, there may be something
Could it be,
that need to be a little bit more, take time to be just a little bit precise. I don't know what that actually looks like. But
Could you come to the microphone, please, Danny? Would you come to the microphone, please?
Yeah, sorry. I would just think more than just a cul-de-sac, because if your cul-de-sacs are usually, that's what you have to do. You're sort of ending something in a cul-de-sac. So I can understand the 40 there, but if you're trying to create more of these curvatures, which in the plan that we have, that we've been working with and trying to augment with the staff and with with you guys, that's where we've interjected more swooping long curves like that. It still has the net effect of take it away, but cul-de-sacs are usually, you have to do them. You're ending something at a property line. We're really forcing ourselves into doing something. If you look at what we presented last week, you all might have seen that. There was a ton more that caused a lot of adjustments on our part here and there that actually, we liked it better, but we lose out of that, and maybe
I
it's
guess-
not maybe it's not.
I guess Mr. Cooper and I were thinking of this, if we could figure out what the radius of that curvature is within the cul-de-sac and match that radius up to a curve or a curve, maybe we can find some commonality. Does that make sense to anyone other than me?
It does.
I think the radius of the cul-de-sac is 120 feet to the right of way. Oh, I'm sorry. You do have that in cul-de-sacs, and I'm not sure, Will, if we have in a regular curve just on a street, if we have any reduction, and that's what we're talking to. In the cul-de-sacs, you got pretty well-defined setbacks and minimum widths that you can work with, but when you're going around a curve in the road, if it's a 100-foot radius, it's pretty tight. But if it's a
That's what I'm
long
trying to-
sweeping curve, I don't know how you would do that, but it would be great if
I
we
mean, I
could figure
understand
out
the
a way.
request, I'm just trying to figure out a mechanism
Yeah.
to get there with something that we already have developed.
Commissioner Rhodes,
Right.
do you have any wisdom for us until
But thank you for your time.
softer
I
curves?
appreciate it.
No, I think to me, it's more a question of what's the lot width at the building line. And you might have a short width at the cul-de-sac, but if you get enough width at the building line on a curve, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's then related to giving enough setbacks on each side and having enough frontage.
Yeah, well, and on this point, you know, the lot averaging can be used and not used, and it's at the discretion of the developer to do it within the development in the particular areas they want. So essentially, they could put smaller lots around curves and turns and cul-de-sacs, and then put larger ones during straightaways. So lot averaging actually, in my viewpoint, assists developers with the problem that was brought up by them here tonight.
I just make one point here. All of these things, the radiuses of cul-de-sacs, the frontage that's required on right-of-ways, those are all functions of the subdivision regulations. And we're not amending the subdivision regulations tonight. This is a zoning code issue where we believe it gives the developer, it has not been the pleasure of the commission, or did we think it was appropriate for staff to think about offering any sorts of variations or averaging on lot widths? It's just lot size only. That's what our recommendation is. That's what the pleasure of the commission was.
Yep.
Frontage on rights-of-way is subdivision regulations. The radiuses required on cul-de-sacs is also subdivision regulations, which now match our fire code. So I'd be very hesitant to go down this trail tonight
I
about
agree.
looking at
I'm
radiuses
in
and
100%
frontage
with
on
you,
Sure
Mr.
will.
Ryder.
You don't want us to
We
chase
need
that
another
rabbit?
year, don't we?
We chase all kinds of rabbits all
We
the
just
time.
updated the subdivision regulations to match the fire code. I think we're in a pretty good place with where they're at right now. This allows the developer some flexibility in lot averaging, which may prevent them from having to do a great deal of grading, and we believe that the lot averaging itself, as she's shown in some examples, improves curb appeal. If that's what we're really after here with curb appeal. And I'll just a reminder that this is for the good of the city and not any particular one project that we believe that these regulations will be good for.
Good job.
Right. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder.
Thank you very much. Anyone else here to speak to the question before I close the floor for public comment? Did I close it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's closed again.
I'd like to make a motion then to.
Well, before we do that, I just want to make sure we have no other conversation or questions for staff before we move to a motion. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Please go ahead.
Did he give you the Joe Wise move?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed articles for lot averaging as presented by staff.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the text changes to Articles 2 and 4 of zoning code related to lot averaging in a second. Any question or discussion before we move forward? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Bailey,
Amber, thank you for making this so clear to the one person on the board who really doesn't know her head from a hole in the ground. But anyway, I vote yes.
Commissioner Cooper,
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich,
Yes.
Commissioner Rhodey.
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Oshenbein.
Yes.
Chairman Dagenhart.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I want to echo that to Ms. Rogers.
Yeah.
We started this conversation a long time ago in a very complicated way of trying to make aesthetics, build aesthetics into our communities, and you've done a wonderful job of creating a workable idea. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, we've got the next item up for consideration is some old business that's new again. Ms. Boren, I think it's up to you.
All right, good evening again, Commissioners. So in front of you, I have a Plan of Services and Zoning Assignment Review associated with the Voluntary Keebler Annexation. Tonight is going to get a little bit convoluted, and so I'm going to try to do my best to break it into as simple of a process as possible for you all. So I want to start with kind of an agenda for just this item. So first, I'm going to kind of walk you guys through the process, what's happened, where we are, and then I'm going to talk about the initial zoning assignment, what is being requested, and then we will discuss next steps, so what's going to happen after that annexation, and then I'm going to kind of just tie it all in with the plan of services and how that works with the zoning assignment. So as far as the process goes, previously, this item has been heard by you all with a request for the rural neighborhood and RP3 zoning districts, with the majority of the property being a rural neighborhood request and RP3 just being this portion to the right of Ford Creek. Since then, the new zoning districts, which includes the rural neighborhood that was a part of that request, are no longer under consideration. So the city is no longer moving forward with those zoning districts. So you can't zone a piece of property, something that doesn't exist. So to kind of break down what exactly has happened to get us to this point, with annexations, you kind of have two processes that run at the same time, but they are different processes. So on the first part, you have the actual annexation itself. So that's going to be the expansion of territory. The city limits are expanding. You are physically gaining land into the city. And what that does is that goes to Planning Commission for a recommendation on the plan of services. And then it goes to City Commission for a preliminary resolution. And then it gets adopted as a final resolution. And that resolution is what actually physically expands your city limits and incorporates the territory into the boundaries. While that is happening, you also have a zoning assignment. And so what happened with this piece of property is it came to Planning Commission for consideration of the rural neighborhood. It went to City Commission, just as it would for any other zoning ordinance. It went to City Commission for its first reading. It went to City Commission for its second reading. But it did not go to City Commission for its third reading, and that is because we stopped with the rural neighborhood and the new zoning districts. So when we removed the new zoning districts, we were no longer able to take the item forward for third reading of the zoning assignment. So what that means is that while the final resolution of the Keebler Annexation has been deferred, we have to go through the zoning assignment process all over again. The annexation, so the physical expansion of territory itself, is uninterrupted. But the zoning assignment has to go all the way back through the process, and that's what brings us to where we are today. So, to kind of give you guys an idea, I left a lot of steps out that have previously happened, but on July 21st, 2022, the request to proceed happened, and now what we have to do moving forward is, tonight, recommend on a zoning assignment from you all, and this will go to City Commission on April 6th for first reading of the zoning assignment. Typically, for annexations, you would also have the preliminary resolution that night. But again, because that hasn't been messed up and we've already gone through that part of the process, we will not be having that on April 6th. On April 20th, we will have the second reading of the zoning assignment at City Commission. And then on May 4th, we will have the third reading of the public hearing, a third reading and public hearing of the zoning assignment. We will also have the final resolution associated with the annexation because that was the date that it was deferred to. And it was deferred to that date of May 4th in order to allow the zoning assignment to catch back up. So that as we incorporate the territory, on the same night that we incorporate the territory, we are also able to zone the territory. So that's where we are today. That's the process that's happened. Those are the steps that have been in motion. And that brings us to where we are right now, which is our initial zoning assignment. So the applicant is seeking a zoning assignment of R2B, which is low-density residential district, for the single-family portion of this property, RP3 for the portion that they want to do multifamily. There is no binding concept plan with this initial zoning request. So as you can see, the R2B is on this side of Ford Creek. It's the vast majority of the property. And you have RP3 kind of out towards the roads along the edges of the property. Staff believes that this land use is appropriate because the R2B on the interior of the property, that again comprises most of the property, is a single-family designation. It's a suitable density for the area. And the RP3, kind of on the other side of the creek, is along your main roads. You kind of want to keep your higher density out towards the main roads, and then your single-family behind it. Those are best planning practices. And so the density and multifamily portion is acceptable and reasonable land use for this portion of the property. And the single-family portion, again, is an acceptable and reasonable land use for the back portion of the property. And because this has no binding concept plan, what this means is that if this gets annexed and zoned this, and the developer walks away, and the plan that we've seen before is no more, it's gone, this is the zoning that will remain. So if any developer down the road comes along, picks this property up, they would have the entitlements of the R2B and all of the entitlements of the RP3. And staff believes that that's reasonable and appropriate for this piece of land. Kind of building on what I just said, the future land use map supports that. So I know that this along the road is shown as commercial and the back half is kind of shown as residential, but the idea is sort of the same. You want your higher intensity uses, commercial, higher density residential, to be along those roads, and then the residential portion in the back. And our future land use map doesn't differentiate between densities of residential. So the fact that it actually shows residential in the back and commercial in the front really just further kind of shows what staff is trying to say about density and intensity kind of towards the road, and again, that single family, less dense area behind it. Okay, so that was the initial zoning assignment. No concept plan associated with that. And now we're going to talk about next steps. If this property were to be annexed with the zoning assignment that I just mentioned, in an effort to be completely transparent, both the applicant and the city wants to disclose that the applicant plans to come in and request a rezoning. Why would they want to request a rezoning if they just got a zoning district? Because they are going to request a rezoning for the R2B portion of their property to rezone it to an RP district. Now, the reason why an RP district is not appropriate on the front end is because there is no binding concept plan. So to allow for the density with no concept plan, staff does not believe would be appropriate for this area. However, the RP zoning district could be appropriate if there was a binding concept plan with it. But you cannot require, or have, for that matter, a binding concept plan on an initial zoning district. You will get all of the entitlements of that zoning district. And so once this territory is incorporated into the city, and it has a zoning assignment of R2B, the applicant is completely eligible to request a rezoning to an RP district that would include a binding concept plan. That means that as opposed to all of the entitlements of the district that they previously had, they have to develop according to the plan, and that plan is associated with the rezoning. So if the developer seeks a rezoning, it gets approved with this plan, and they walk away. Somebody will have to come in and come back through the process and ask for a concept plan amendment. So that binding concept plan becomes associated with the zoning. And again, I just want to kind of take this all back to this idea of land use. Single family R2B is appropriate. Single family RP could also be appropriate, but not without this binding concept plan. And so that's where the idea of having this rezoning comes into play. And so the concept plan that they're showing right here shows 362 single family lots, 126 townhomes, and it actually uses a variety of lot sizes. So I know we just had a whole discussion about lot averaging. But this is the concept plan that they have most recently provided us. And so if they came back in with a rezoning, you guys would get to kind of scrutinize that concept plan a little harder, as opposed to maybe focusing on the land use discussion that we've been talking about as far as annexations go. I also do want to note that the RP portion of the property, so these townhomes, would not come before you for a rezoning, because they're seeking the appropriate zoning district, and staff believes that that's appropriate as is. But again, we just don't believe that allowing the entitlements of the RP district on the whole property is appropriate. We do want to take steps to ensure that the back portion of the property does remain single family. And so that is, again, just to be completely transparent for the city and the applicant. You know, the applicant wants to have that concept plan be tied to the RP zoning. And so what that timeline would look like, again, this is happening after annexation. We've already gone through all of our annexation steps, annexed into the city. Now they're seeking a rezoning. That would come before the Planning Commission on June 13th. It would come for 3 readings at City Commission, just like any other rezoning. So it would go July 6th, July 20th, with second reading being public hearing, because it's a rezoning, and then third and final reading on August 3rd. So those were the next steps. So just to kind of sum up where we are, we talked about the history, how we got here, their current request, and essentially their request after annexation. How does the plan of services work with all of this? So the plan of services was included in your packet, and to be completely honest with you all, it has really had minimal changes, because ultimately the plan of services is based off of, the zoning assignment and the development plans, and so those have stayed pretty constant throughout the entire process. And so the development plans in your packet for the plan of services really is the same whether this item is an R2B or whether they develop under the RP district showing the concept plan that they have. But you guys have seen the plan of services, you've talked about the plan of services. The plan of services is associated with the annexation, so it's already technically made its way through its preliminary resolution, and it's on the final resolution for the annexation. But it is important to note that the plan of services and the zoning assignment do work together, because, if you have a plan of services that says that you absolutely can't serve more than 10 people, and you have a zoning assignment that allows for, a density of way more than that, but we don't have any of those discrepancies here. But I do want to make sure that you guys understand how the plan of services and the zoning kind of work together. Here are a few photos of the property. And staff does recommend approval of the zoning assignment of R2B and RP3. Again, R2B on that larger portion and RP3 to the other side of Ford Creek for the higher density multifamily portion. And I can answer any questions because I know that that was a lot of information.
That was a good presentation, very clearly stated. Questions for staff? You must have done a very good job.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Voren. I'm going to open the floor for public comment. If anyone's here to speak to the question, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address. Seeing no one, I'm going to close the floor and turn the question to us.
Well, I will say, I think we had a lot of good discussion at the workshop, Chairman. And I think this was a really creative, smart way to approach this so that the public could have full transparency of the neighborhood coming to their community, definitely since the size is large. This way they'll know there's a concept plan that's binding, and they can have full clarity in what's going to happen to the property and have the open mic to ask questions about it in a community forum. So I applaud the staff, the developer, for doing so.
Thank you.
But no, we're only voting on the R2B, right? And we come back again for RP3.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
No, just to clarify on that, you are voting on the R2B and the RP3. Sorry, let me go back
The
to
the full package.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
It's here.
the rezoning portion that
And
you
this
would
will
not
get
be concerned
rezoned.
about tonight would
This back here.
rezone this. But tonight you are considering the R2B on this portion and the RP3 on this portion.
And Ms. Warren, just as for the public, all of our departments in the city approved that they could support this neighborhood, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
The plan of services in your packet has been very well reviewed
Yep,
by
it was-
every,
yep.
every department.
It was, thank you for that detail.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Please come forward, Mr. Sells. And give us your name and address again, please, sir.
We have closed.
Danny Sells, 325 Delmer Salts Road. And more so really than on this in particular, I'd just like to say for clarity, if it could be made available, the slide presentations, preferably before we have the hearing, but certainly useful after you have this hearing, it would be much more, there's much more explanation in it and much more understanding the way Ms. Voren went through the process and understood on all three of these, in fact, would be more illustrative of what we're actually doing if we had that PowerPoint presentation. Now, it may not be appropriate as she's presenting this to you, but at least afterward, when we go back to review this and look at it again, it'll be incredibly valuable because there's a lot of information in that is not available just in what comes out on the agenda and in the agenda packet. It would just be very useful from a clarity standpoint.
I understand, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
for
much.
that comment.
Are our meetings still on YouTube at the,
They are.
Always do.
The recording.
Mr. Sells, you can always find the meetings on YouTube.
But he's saying ahead of time.
Yeah,
Danny's Mr. Sells is saying.
We don't get the presentations ahead of
we-
time.
The hearing's going on.
Oh, I said our meetings are always on YouTube.
Well,
We don't get the slides before you do.
well, I know that. Well, and that's okay. I'm just saying that now that it is public, it would be useful for us to look at so we know the date, so we can understand what's being said a little bit better, because, you know, some of this stuff was, you know, about as clear as mud, even though Ms. Voren did an excellent job of putting it together. The first time I heard it, I was so confused, my head was spinning. But it would just be useful because for most people, from myself, sitting down and going through this stuff again, I don't listen to it on YouTube. I will go through the whole packet again, and we'll listen to it on YouTube. But I need to look at that in order for it to really sink in. I mean, I understand what you're
I'm a
saying, and I
paper
do
guy.
watch the
I'm a paper
meetings
guy,
afterwards
too.
if
I
I can
understand.
attend.
Yeah.
I get it.
Thank you.
It would be useful beforehand, but I understand the need to
Yep.
present to you all before it goes to the public.
Mr. Chairman?
We backed into reopening public comments, and so now I'm going to close it again. Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Rhodey.
One thing, mechanically, I have bad eyesight, so I made myself a blow-up of the site plan. Not that that site plan is the final one, but it will come up for the rezoning of the single family. So the more the public understands and looks at these, I think the more communication we have as a tool. So I don't know whether to print these out on 11 by 17s for the public whenever there's a meeting.
Well, I think that's a question that staff's going to take under
Yeah.
consideration.
Just
I don't think
somehow-
we can problem solve that from up
Right.
here this evening.
But it's a good tool to have.
I think we have learned from some immediate experience that having more people at the table for our consultations and our discussions in our workshop is helpful to us.
Great, yeah.
I think it helps us get to a better place and a better decision.
Yeah,
I
it's all
think we've made
communication.
a huge step forward in
Agreed,
using this as an example.
right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
with that, I would like to entertain a motion for approval of the plan of services and the zoning assignment for the Keebler annexation for the proposed R2B and proposed RP3.
I'll second that. And I
Okay.
just want to just take a quick second and just also just commend the city. I know this has been bouncing around for a long time, and I'd like to commend the developer as well. It looks a heck of a lot different than it did a couple months ago. So I just appreciate everyone's work on this together. We listened to the community. We had several meetings out in the community as well. I just want the community to know their voices were heard, and this is, I think, a great proposal.
Any other questions or conversation? Nicole, please call the roll.
Commissioner Bailey?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Rhodey?
Yes.
Commissioner Whitfield?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Oshenbein?
Yes.
Chairman Dagenhart?
Yes.
Motion has carried.
Thank you very much. I want to add to the comments that were made earlier and thank particularly staff, led by Mr. Ryder, in helping us get to this good place. I think everybody's learned a lot along the way, and thank you very much, everyone else. Any other questions or comments or items for us to consider before we call the meeting to adjourn? Seeing none, I'll adjourn the meeting.